As we begin, we would like to acknowledge that this service is being held by a community that gathers on the stolen traditional lands of the Massachusetts, Nipmuc, Pawtucket, and Wampanoag people. We pay respect to those indigenous peoples who lost their lives in the colonization of this land, and recognize that these indigenous tribes are still today facing violations of sovereignty, territory, and water. We also give thanks for the earth we walk upon, the waters, the life-giving plants, and all the earth's creatures, as well as the wind, sun, moon, and stars. We recognize that this is just a first step in moving toward right relationship with Native peoples and healing of the earth. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to First Parish Church of Stowe and Acton, FPC, to our members and friends, welcoming and spiritual community. My name is Marcia Rising, and I serve as one of your lay ministers. If this is your first time with us, we welcome you. Our minister and staff are listed on the front of the order of service. Please feel free to ask me or any of those people for more information about the church and its programs after the service, or by email or through the chat if you're online. We also invite you to check out our webpage for news and information, and you can also sign up there for our newsletter and email alerts. We ask that people remain masked in our sanctuary, except in the balcony and in the church offices and RE spaces, but the rest of our building is mask optional. Please check with the people you're talking to about their comfort levels, and please make sure the air filters are on when you congregate in any room. If you would like a large print order of service or hymnal or an assisted living device, please ask one of our ushers. Our assisted living listening devices are actually small radios that work throughout the building if you would like to listen to the service from another space for any room. After the service, please join us for coffee and conversation in our fellowship hall, which is one level down at the other end of our building, or in a break room if you're joining us online. And I would like to draw your attention to the announcements that Cindy will give you.
Thank you, Marcia. I have a few announcements for you this morning. The first is that if you were at our Vigil Against Anti-Semitism, there was a member of Congregation Bethel in Sudbury who was handing out these buttons. They say, "I've got your back." Given the increasing rise of anti-Semitism, we want to have the Jewish people of this community's back. But this doesn't just stand for having Jewish people's back, it stands for having the backs of all people who are oppressed in our society today. And that's the vision that Congregation Bethel has of creating networks to respond to all acts of hate. So there's a whole basket, not a whole basket, there are a couple dozen buttons here in this basket. If you didn't get one before and you would like one, when we run out, I'll go ask Martin if we can have some more. And I wear them everywhere. Secondly, I want to introduce you to a very special person to our community, Meg Rivers-Wright. Meg, would you stand? This is Meg. Meg has accepted the position of our new membership coordinator and parish administrator. She's already been attending for several weeks ever since applying. She lives in Maynard and is local to our community, already knows some of you from other places and paths of life, and is someone who is a UU of many decades in history and faith. So she comes with that orientation already. Meg will start December 12th. And we'll have a couple of weeks overlap in the administrative role with Marie, who will be leaving us just before Christmas. So I hope you will all give her a warm FPC welcome. Lastly, I want to draw your attention to the announcements in your order of service and tell you that there is a carol sing after the service here today. Yay! We're going to launch into it as our postlude. So we'll go right into it, and then there will still be coffee hour following downstairs. I brought cookies. If you take a cookie, that means you're helping with decorating. And so you can see that some of our decorations, like the wreath, are up, and some of ours, like the garland that goes on the balcony, are not. And so after the carols sing, if you're willing to help decorate, come join me here in the sanctuary. I'll tell you where the bins are and what things need to happen still, and we'll get these halls decked out for the holidays. That concludes my announcements this morning, and now let us come together in a time of worship. Oh, one more announcement.
Sorry, one more announcement. I want to draw your attention to next Sunday's service as well, which is going to be a special music service in the holiday season. It's a service that we used to offer pre-pandemic that was not during the service time, but later in the afternoon. We pushed it into the normal service time, and I'd love to encourage you to bring friends and bring family to that. We're going to have 7 instrumentalists here with us, soloists coming in, some students from a local group joining us, singing the entirety of Vivaldi Gloria, as well as several other carols and songs with a small orchestra. So definitely don't miss next Sunday, and please bring friends and family to see what FPC is doing this holiday season.
Good morning. Good morning. Our opening words are from Margaret Gooding, Peg Gooding, titled, "Why Not a Star?" They told me that when Jesus was born, a star appeared in the heavens above the place where the young child lay. When I was very young, I had no trouble believing wondrous things. I believed in the star. It was a wonderful miracle, part of a long ago story foretelling an uncommon life. They told me that a supernova appeared in the heavens in a dying burst of fire. When I was older and believed in science and reason, I believed the story of the star explained. But I found I was unwilling to give up the star, fitting symbol of the birth of one whose uncommon life has been long remembered. The star explained became the star understood for Jesus, for Buddha, for Zarathustra. Why not a star? Some bright star shines somewhere in the heavens each time a child is born. Who knows what it may foretell? Who knows what uncommon life may yet again unfold if we give it a chance? Our words for lighting of our Advent candles and for our chalice come from the Reverend David Breeden. Advent, Adventus, means waiting. And the holiday season is nothing if not waiting. To get the chores done, to find the right gift, to find the time for the quiet moments, to accept that our loved ones will not be as we wish them to be. We will light the chalice this holiday season, this time around, for waiting, to remind ourselves to enjoy the moment, the now of our lives. Yes, much is coming. And we always wait, but those things to come will also be now when they come. This week, we remember the foundation of all of our faith, love. In this holiday season and throughout the year to come, and always in our lives, may we know that we are loved, and may we share the love we have. May we be the love we wish to see. Please rise in body or in spirit and join in our opening hymn number 226, People Look East. And please join in our covenant and affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Is Russ Hart here this morning? He's on Zoom for our test. You're giving a testimonial, I understand.
Okay. Well, good morning. I'm Russel Hart, and my wife Katie and I have been members of FPC since 1990. Our daughter Amanda was dedicated in this church, attended RE classes here, was fostered and nurtured in the ideals of our 7 principles in this church, and was held in the spirit of those principles until she graduated from high school. I believe that embrace has continued to hold her until this day, even as an adult. As for me, I've either taught in RE and or been a member of the RE committee for probably 30 years. So yeah, you know, it's that time of year when we get to think about stewardship, when we get to think about the values of those institutions that sustain us, that foster our connections, that support our children, support our families, that sustain our collective spirit, that brings us together in common cause towards our spiritual well-being, that holds us in community. And if you do think about that, it becomes clear that it really is a privilege for us to be in a position to do so, to be able to worship here. Not everyone has that privilege. Look around at this beautiful structure and think about our beautiful campus. Consider that we have really good leadership. It's a privilege. So here's the question, what are we going to do with that privilege? The theme of this year's stewardship drive is growing connections, with one of the focuses of those connections being to deepen our commitment to our children and youth. So let me focus on that some, with my apologies to those who have heard this before, as it contains themes I've been speaking about for probably 20 years. I became involved in RE because it became clear to me early on that this church, this RE program, the curriculums and what they attempt to impart had great potential for helping my daughter develop an ethical and spiritual foundation in a way that I could not on my own. And I wanted that for her. And I've been willing to give my energy and my financial resources then and now in the present toward that goal for all children and youth in this church, because this is a community that attempts to support all children, all youth, all individuals and couples, and all families. As a therapist, now retired, I've been aware that our children and youth are often encouraged to become attracted to and love the wrong things that are not healthy for them. I'm aware that they often cut off the healthy pieces of themselves in order to fit in, to belong. I'm aware that the numerous pressures on children and youth are intensely difficult in ways that we adults may not fully understand or appreciate. And those pressures begin earlier and earlier. But here at FPC, through our RE programs, kids have an opportunity to develop resiliency against many of those pressures. We have an opportunity to help our youth to stay connected to the healthy pieces of themselves, to help them engage in activities to become resiliency enhancing. Likewise, when we ask our children and youth to think freely for themselves and to speak freely for themselves without fear, without shame, without judgment, without fear of sinfulness, we are helping them to develop emotional intelligence. And there is research that demonstrates that emotional intelligence is a better indicator of success in adulthood than grades or where you graduated from college. We are therefore helping our children and youth to develop empathy, self-discipline, and self-awareness. This, as I previously mentioned, becomes the foundation for responsible and ethical behavior in our children. It becomes a catalyst for our children's natural spirituality. It's what helps them to feel safe in a fast-paced, tumultuous world. This is why I've been involved with our religious education program for 30 years. It's why I've continued to support FPC financially and have increased my pledge every year when asked to do so. On behalf of the Board of Trustees and the Stewardship Committee, I'd like you to consider the privilege of being able to worship in this church and to increase your pledge accordingly to the best of your abilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Russ. And now I'd like to introduce our Acting Director of Religious Education, Marissa Evans, with his message for all ages.
Good morning. So today I'm going to read a story called Long Ago on a Silent Night. And this book is about the birth of Jesus, but it's also about how each person that is born is special and loved and brings something good to the world. We Unitarian Universalists remember Jesus for teaching loving kindness. We use the legend of the birth story of Jesus to remind ourselves of the wonder of new life. Long ago and far away, a baby was born on Christmas Day. Shepherds knelt and angels sang, till the night sky with rejoicing rang. This wonder was seen by a lucky few. I see a miracle in you. Long ago in a dusty barn, a mother took a child in her arms, wrapped him snug, made his bed in hay. He was her gift that Christmas Day. There's no sweeter gift than a life so new. My best gift, little one, is you. Long ago, at her child's first cry, a mother sang a lullaby. Sleep, little angel, sleep, little lamb. When you need comfort, here I am. I will always watch over you. Hush, little babe, I'll sing it too. Long ago, with scarcely a sound, the stable's animals gathered round. Hoof and feather, hide and beak, some say the animals began to speak their love for the child. Could that be true? We will whisper our love to you. Long ago on a silent night, travelers followed a new star's light, bearing gifts of love to welcome a child who would one day calm a tempest wild and teach mercy and gentleness as he grew. My love, you are a gentle teacher too. Long ago at a temple door, Simeon and Anna paced the floor, awaiting a glimpse of a promised son, a prince of peace, a chosen one. Before you came, our family knew it was worth the wait to welcome you. Long ago, so the carols sing, was born to a maiden an infant king, with the sky for a palace, the earth for a throne, the hills and the rivers, his treasures to own. Through your eyes, the skies shine a deeper blue. Treasure of mine, you make all things new. Long ago, as the day followed day, this baby grew in the usual way. Watched and rocked and taught and fed, washed and dressed and tucked into bed. We're blessed in the simplest things we do. You return the love that we give to you. Long ago, at that sacred birth, a piece of heaven fell to earth to light the world and spread God's peace, bringing hope and help that would never cease. From the moment I held you, child, I knew you came straight from heaven too. Not long ago, in a nearby place, was given to me a gift of grace. All my hopes, my joy, my heart's desire, your sweet voice is my angel choir. Wondrous baby, strange and true. Little one, my miracle is you. So this was a very nice story. And now in religious education, we're going to keep talking about the wonder of new life, but we're going to get a little sillier, such as reading a book called 15 Things Not to Do with a Baby and playing charades. And today our junior youth is on a field trip to the Acton Congregational Church, and our high schoolers are downstairs in coming of age already. But if we do have any junior and senior youth who aren't doing that, you're welcome to join us as well downstairs.
We begin our time of joys and sorrows today with a lighting of this candle in recognition of World AIDS Day. I was a teenager in the 1980s during the AIDS epidemic. And, recently I was reading through the Stowe newspaper archives and was seeing to look for things about our minister Don Kafka, and I saw that in 1986, Stowe was in a battle over whether children with AIDS could attend school without their names being publicized to the whole community. Those were the battles we were in those days. Today, World AIDS Day is not so much about the deaths and the fear that was happening then, as it is about continuing to educate and continuing to remind people that AIDS is still with us, and to inform people and to lift up needs for resources still in many parts of the world to protect against AIDS and to help people live with AIDS, which most people are doing today. So for all these things, in recognition of the deaths of the past and those of the present, and in honor of those living with AIDS, and in recognition of the education work still to be done, we light this candle this morning. For all these joys and sorrows that we have heard this morning, and for those that are still within our hearts, let us take a moment of silence, holding them and holding each other. Spirit of life, we're grateful for the opportunity to be together in community, to walk with each other, to sit with each other, to be with each other through all the joys and sorrows of our days. Blessed be, and amen. Our next hymn is number 55, Dark of Winter. Please stand if you wish, sit if you wish, in body or in spirit, join in song. We take an offering. They say that an offering is the sacrament of the free church. And by that, we mean that it's something we give to willingly, that it's our gift of love to support this congregation. And every month we split our offering with a different organization, some of them groups from within our community, sometimes groups around our community. This month, it's our own FPC guest table. If you haven't been to one of our monthly guest table dinners, which we had to shut down for a while in the pandemic, but are back up and running this fall, they are wonderful community dinners. They bring together people from the community, people from this church, people from outside the church, people who need an opportunity to be with other people who are food insecure, and people who just like a good meal, to come together and be served. It's put on like a restaurant. The people serve the people at the tables, and then at the end of the meal, there's usually leftover food to take with you when you go. Guest table does not receive any funding from our general budget. It's entirely self-supported through plate shares and other donations and grants. And so this opportunity is our once a year month of opportunity to give generously to guest table. I hope you will.
Keep your lamps trimmed and burning, keep your lamps trimmed and burning, keep your lamps trimmed and burning, the time is drawing nigh. Keep your lamps trimmed and burning, keep your lamps trimmed and burning, keep your lamps trimmed and burning, the time is drawing nigh. Children, know you're weary. Children, know you're weary. Children, know you're weary. Till your work is done. Children, know you're weary. Children, know you're weary. Children, Christian journey soon be over. The time is drawing nigh. Christian journey soon be over. Christian journey soon be over. Christian journey soon be over. The time is drawing nigh. Keep your lamps trimmed and burning. Keep your lamps trimmed and burning. Keep your lamps trimmed and burning. The time is drawing nigh. Keep your lamps trimmed and burning. Keep your lamps trimmed and burning. Keep your lamps trimmed and burning. The time is drawing
That was the second monthly open choir performance. The open choir is an opportunity for people to come on the first Sunday of the month and not have to come to choir rehearsal on Thursday nights, but just join in on singing on Sunday morning with a rehearsal that begins at 9 o'clock. So bravo, choir, well done.
It's an old favorite.
I realize that because Unitarian Universalists sometimes get a little itchy, as I call it, around the subject of Jesus, I tend to not preach on Jesus-related topics in the month of December because I do focus on the story of his birth on Christmas Eve. And so that leaves me with not having very often preached on the subject of the historical understandings of Jesus's birth. But I think Unitarian Universalists, as much as we get itchy about too much talk about Jesus, are also hungry for for re-understanding and examining the Christian and Jewish texts and trying to bring that historical lens to them. And so this year I decided I will talk about it here in the month of December leading up to Christmas. In my last church, we often hosted, in order to have more of that time to examine the historical Jesus, we hosted a group called the Jesus Seminar. Are many of you familiar with the Jesus Seminar and their work? So the Jesus Seminar is a group of scholars, a band of scholars of Jesus who've made it their job to look for the historical Jesus. And they come together, and one of their first projects was to go through the Bible and look at all those lines that are in red in your red letter editions and study them and decide which they thought actually were spoken by Jesus. And they voted with marbles, I think, on each one. And they would put in a red marble if they thought, yes, this is definitely Jesus. Pink, if it was maybe spoken by Jesus. Gray, if they thought, no, this probably wasn't spoken by Jesus. And black, if it was like, this line is not something Jesus would have said. There's good reason to believe he didn't. And then they published this red, pink, gray, black letter edition of the Gospels, and it was quite controversial, as you might expect. They also published a slim volume titled The Gospel of Jesus, where they put together all the pieces that they thought were historical from all the Gospels and integrated it into one gospel. What does that gospel say about his birth? Here's what they put in it. Jesus was a descendant of Abraham. Jesus' parents were named Mary and Joseph. Joseph and Mary, they say. Jesus was born when Herod was king. 8 days later, when they came to circumcise him, they gave him the name Jesus. In fact, most New Testament scholars on the more liberal side of New Testament scholars who don't take the Bible as the inerrant word of God and are looking for the historical Jesus don't believe that most of the birth story is historical at all. Stephen Mitchell writes, frankly, no good scholar, for example, would call the Christmas stories anything but legends. Marcus Borg writes, Within the New Testament, the birth of Jesus is referred to only in two relatively late sources, the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, both written in the last 20 years of the first century. Paul, the earliest New Testament author, whose genuine letters were written between approximately AD 48 and his death somewhere between AD 62 and 64, does not mention Jesus being born in a special way. Neither does Mark, the earliest gospel, written around the year 70, nor does the Gospel of John. At the very least, this suggests that the stories about the birth of Jesus were not central to the early Christian movement. I would add that it is important to realize that while we have some sources outside of Christian texts for the existence of Jesus, we know from Josephus and others that such a man lived and died, and we have non-Christian sources for that, and that he was killed by the Romans. We have no sources from that time that mention his birth at all, other than these two Gospels, and some later non-canonical Christian writings. And none that mention his birth at all, or that there was anything special about it. So it is only the Gospels accounts and those later non-canonical Christian writings that elaborate on them. Now, three of the Gospels we call the Synoptic Gospels. That's Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And we call those Gospels the Synoptic Gospels because they so closely parallel each other. They have the same stories, the same Sermon on the Mount, those kinds of things in them. Those things that are in all three are the ones that the Jesus scholars consider to be the most central and most likely to be true about the Jesus narrative. Scholars posit that those three sources drew from a common earlier source that they call Q, for Quelle, which is the German word for source. And of course, the birth stories are in only two of those, Matthew and Luke, but not in Mark, which was the earliest of the three to be written down. But it's more complicated than that because the birth stories in Matthew and Luke are not the same stories at all, except for the facts about Joseph and Mary and Bethlehem and a few other things. In Matthew, it begins with a lineage of Jesus that traces him back from Joseph through David to Abraham. We have Mary pregnant, and Joseph considers divorcing her, but an angel appears to Joseph. And then we skip forward to the King Herod story with the wise men traveling to Bethlehem and following the star. Over in Luke, we have an angel appearing to Elizabeth's husband, Zechariah, and we have the story of the birth of John the Baptist. And then the angel appears to Mary, likewise, and tells her that she will have a son. Then Elizabeth has her son, and then we get the story about traveling for the census, the travel to Bethlehem, the angels appearing to the shepherds. And then we skip over wise men and go 8 days forward to his circumcision, where he's named Jesus as the angel has declared. So we're pretty sure between these two accounts that Jesus was born and that he was circumcised and that his parents were Mary and Joseph. So one has angels and shepherds and the other has wise men and Herod. One has an angel appearing to Joseph, one to Mary. There's very little overlap, except those agreements on those facts, that Mary was pregnant before she was married. They agree on that. That Jesus is descended from David. They agree. That he was born during the reign of King Herod. That he was from Nazareth, but born in Bethlehem. And these are the same things, basically, that the Jesus Seminar put in their combined gospel, with the exception of God's involvement in the birth, and that Mary was a virgin. The rest of the story we have no basic agreement on. One basic argument against the historicity of the birth narratives is that we're told by Matthew that Jesus was born during a census, and while Quirinius was governor and Herod was king. But there was no census recorded during the reign of King Herod. And the only census by Quirinius is 10 years after the death of Herod. So right there we have a problem. But the whole census story really doesn't make sense anyway, because people were counted where they lived, not where they were born. Can you imagine the chaos if everybody had to travel back to where they were born every 10 years or so? They were not required to do that, to make pilgrimages to the places of their birth. But there are reasons why this is in the story, and we'll get to that. So if we are agreed that this story is a story tacked onto the Gospels, not a recounting of history as it occurred, but written by the Matthew author and the John author for other purposes other than recounting history, maybe partly from earlier sources, what do we make of this story? There are two approaches that I think are interesting to take for religious liberals. One is to say, okay, we've accepted this as not historical, but as fiction, but what does the Bible really say? What are the things we've added to the narrative over time, and what are the things we've misunderstood? The second approach is to say, okay, this is fiction, but what does it mean? Why did the authors create this? And what were they trying to say? And both approaches have their merit. Looking at the stories and what we might have understood and what we've added to over time, I would start with saying December 25th, that's not in the Bible. That's something we've added over time. It was moved to that date to line up with the celebrations of Saturn and the winter solstice, and to take advantage of the fact that people were already celebrating at this time of year. A particular historical misunderstanding that I've always found interesting is that so many of our pageants and celebrations feature an innkeeper coldly turning away Mary and Joseph at the door of the inn. There is no innkeeper mentioned in the Bible. That's a whole character we've invented for pageantry. And it makes sense that, like, if there's an inn, there would be an innkeeper. That's where we get to the problem of there wasn't actually an inn either. The word we've translated as inn is more accurately translated as guest room. And many modern translations, such as the NIV, translate it this way. The NIV says, she wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger because there was no guest room available for them. There's no inn. It's noteworthy that this translation also has no stable mentioned. That's an assumption we make, that since there's a manger, they're in a stable. But in Judean households 2 millennia ago, animals were brought into the house for the night to protect them from theft and to keep them warm. So according to scholar Ian Paul, Mary and Joseph were likely in a common room at Joseph's family's house, not an inn or a stable, if we to understand what the text actually says in its historical context, without our later assumptions placed on it. That same room that's translated as inn is the word translated as upper room when Jesus is having the Last Supper. That upper room was not available to them, so they had to sleep in the common lower room with the animals. This is really a little thing, right? Stable versus inn versus stable versus household room, inn versus family home. It doesn't change the story deeply, but it's a sign of how our interpretations change through the centuries as we place modern concepts onto ancient words. One particular concept in these texts has received more scrutiny than any other part of the birth story. Was Mary a virgin? And how are we to understand that Jesus is conceived by the Holy Spirit and is the Son of God? Now, I would argue to say Son of God and to be conceived by the Holy Spirit doesn't naturally mean that you are God. It doesn't imply the Trinity. So let's set that aside for now. We can talk about the Trinity some other day. But Robert Miller writes, belief in the virgin birth of Jesus is only a marginal element in the theologies of the New Testament. It is not a prominent feature even within the canonical infancy narratives. Yet as the system of mainstream Christian belief developed, the virgin birth took on an importance far out of proportion to its place in the Bible. It became a cornerstone Christian doctrine with powerful implications for what Christianity believed about the divinity of Jesus and the role of Mary in the economy of salvation. More generally, he continues, it profoundly influenced how Christians would come to view human sexuality, end quote. So we need Mary to be a virgin in later Christian theology in order to justify the great sacrifice of Jesus in the eternal balancing of scales that allows Jesus to die for all of our sins. In order for Jesus' death to be worth all of our sins, Jesus has to be extra special, extra pure, extra free from sin himself, and therefore Mary needs to have not had sex in order for Jesus' purity to be fully established, to make that scale balance work on the eternal scales, as later Christian theologians understood it. But what did the text say then, 2 millennia almost, minus 70 years or so ago? Historical scholars fall on either side of this one. Bruce Chilton writes, the famous text in Greek, a maiden, Parthenos, shall conceive, became a virgin shall conceive, when Matthew was translated into Latin during the 2nd century. And the change of a word fed the development of the legend of Jesus' miraculous birth. Both Alma in Isaiah's Hebrew, because Matthew is pulling from Isaiah to fulfill Isaiah's prophecies, both Alma in Isaiah's Hebrew and Parthenos in Matthew's Greek, and come to that even the Latin Virgo refer to a maiden rather than a biological virgin. Robert Miller says of Matthew's account, my judgment is that Matthew probably did not intend to describe a virginal conception, but I'm not willing to say for sure that he did not. If the question was, does Matthew describe a virgin birth and was put to the Jesus seminar, I would vote gray, by which I would mean probably not, but you can't rule it out. Luke, however, he is more ambiguous. Miller says of it, Luke knew that simply calling Mary a Parthenos was not enough to ensure that his readers would understand the point. Luke 1:27 tells us that Mary was a Parthenos, and 1:34 clarifies what kind of Parthenos she was, a Parthenos who was also a virgin. So we could debate Mary's sexual history all day, and Robert Miller's book does that basically. But I'm going to leave that question aside, as I think the authors, whatever they were trying to tell us about Jesus's parentage, were also not meaning for us to take it as a historical understanding in the way that biblical literacists do now. And there's a good argument for the idea that the authors were giving us narrative, not history. Miller writes, the final reason for thinking that the infancy narratives do not record historical events is that, as best as we can tell, their authors did not intend them to be historical accounts, nor did the audiences expect it. In Luke's Hellenistic culture, he continues, biographies were expected to convey a plausible picture of the man's life and times, and, more important, a true sense of the man's character. Stories of the man's birth and childhood were not evaluated on whether they preserved reliable memories from those who knew his early years. Instead, they were evaluated on how effectively they introduced the known abilities and characters of the man by making them evident in the manner of his origin. So that question brings us to the larger questions. If the Gospels weren't recounting history, but rather narrative, what was this narrative trying to tell us? The Matthew and Luke authors are telling us several important things. First, they're making parallels between Jesus and Moses. Moses escaped the slaughtering of the firstborns by Pharaoh and escaped Egypt and grew up to be a leader of the Jews. So you see, Jesus is like Moses. Jesus also escaped the slaughter of the innocents by Herod, and his parents escaped with him to Egypt, and then he left Egypt and he too grew up to be a great leader of the Jewish people. Jesus is like Moses, they are saying. The next thing the stories, particularly the Matthew stories, are telling us is that Jesus is of the house of David. And this is important because Isaiah, the prophet, told us that a Messiah will come from the house of David. Jesus fulfills the prophecies of Isaiah, they say. So Isaiah is very clear that the Messiah is from the lineage of David. And so we get Jesus's heritage back to David recounted through Joseph. So we are to understand in some respect that Joseph is a father to Jesus. And yet, and we all are so supposed to understand that Jesus is a son of God. And these are not mutually contradictory things. So Jesus is only from the house of David if Joseph is a biological father. And that's one argument for understanding Jesus's parentage there. Another thing Isaiah tells us is the name of the Messiah. You know how in the hymns we sing, O come, Emmanuel. Isaiah says the prophet will be called Emmanuel, which is God is with us. So they make great points to tell us that the angels are telling us to name him Jesus. And Jesus means God saves. So the names are linked. And the authors are telling us that even though this isn't exactly the same name, Jesus is the one Isaiah was talking about. That's where we also get the Parthenos of Mary question. Isaiah 7 says the Lord would send a sign and it would be a virgin or a maiden who would conceive and call him Emmanuel. So Jesus, the authors are telling us, is that person. God talked to Mary. Mary named her son Jesus because of the angel. Numerous little lines in the birth stories are echoes of Isaiah. Parts about John the Baptist are also coming back to Isaiah, who talks about a forerunner to the Messiah. And this is why Jesus and Mary must make the trek from Nazareth to Bethlehem. We need the Messiah to be born in Bethlehem because of Isaiah. We need the Messiah to go to Egypt because of Isaiah. Interestingly, Matthew also says that being from Nazareth fulfills the prophets, but we have no earlier scripture that says that. So we don't know what Matthew was looking to when he says that that fulfills the prophecies. Now, there's a lot to be said about how Matthew might be quoting Jewish sources out of context, almost as much as we now quote Matthew out of context, and that this wasn't what the Isaiah scriptures were actually meaning. But what's important for us to understand is that Matthew, not Judaism, but Matthew is telling us that Jesus is the fulfillment of Judean prophecy. But the sources aren't only drawing on Judean prophecy and on the history of Moses. They are also telling us that Jesus is important because Jesus is connected to God in the same way great Roman leaders were connected to God. Jesus is meant to be a great ruler, the same way great Roman leaders were meant to be great rulers. They're echoing the miraculous birth stories of Greek and Roman heroes. Miller writes, ancient biographies were shaped by two beliefs that were universally held and taken for granted. The first was the extraordinary accomplishments of heroes so far surpass the achievements of ordinary humans, of peoples, that these figures cannot be merely human. The second belief was that the greatness of heroes is no accident. The great man had his destiny for greatness from his birth. So, for example, there are stories about Plutarch about Alexander the Great. Plutarch tells of Alexander's mother having a dream, and in the dream, a lightning bolt hits her in the womb and starts a fire. The lightning bolt, symbol of Zeus. So we're to understand from this that Alexander is in some way conceived by Zeus through the dream. And Alexander is a historical figure, of course, as is the Emperor Augustus. And Dio Cassius wrote of Augustus in the history of Rome. Attia, the mother of Augustus, emphatically asserted that her child had been fathered by Apollo. She said that once, while she was sleeping in his temple, she thought she had intercourse with a snake. And that became the birth and because of this, she had given birth at the end of her term. Before the child came to the light of day, she dreamed that her womb was lifted up to the heavens and spread out all over the earth. And that same night, her husband Octavius thought that the sun rose from between her thighs. There you go. Augustus is a child of Apollo. Suetonius tells basically the same story about Augustus. And Diogenes Laertius writes that Plato was descended from the god Poseidon. Great men are great because of their births, because the gods influenced their births. Ultimately, we are not the audience that Matthew and Luke were writing for. People of a particular mindset, who they wanted to convince that this remarkable leader who had lived and died was still worth following, and let me tell you how. And so told of his miraculous beginnings to show that he was more than just a human who lived and died, but someone extraordinary. Marcus Borg writes, the decision of the Christian church in the 4th century to celebrate Jesus' birth at the time of the winter solstice expresses this symbolism perfectly, at least in the northern hemisphere. He is born at the time of deepest darkness, and his birth is the coming of the light. To hear the birth stories again in a state of post-critical naivete is to be able to hear their rich symbolic affirmations without needing to believe them as historical reports, end quote. We don't need an extraordinary birth to believe in our heroes and leaders. And we can, like discard the apple tree story about George Washington, for example. So for us, the birth story serves another purpose, one beyond perhaps the intent of the authors and one beyond historical truth. The story of Jesus' birth for us isn't the literal historical story of God born from a virgin, but rather it's the story of how greatness comes from humble beginnings. The manger in a stable and no room at the inn may not be the historical truth, but they are the truth that we need for this era, because it speaks to us of a hospitality, of welcome, of the extraordinary hardship facing many people of homelessness today. We don't need for a virgin birth, because for us it is the story of a depth of love of a mother for her child, and the ultimate story of adoption as well, of lovingly adopting a son. It tells how, in the words of Unitarian religious educator Sophia Lyon-Faz, each night a child is born is a holy night. It tells the age-old and cross-cultural tale of the sun returning after the winter's darkness. We don't need the 25th of December to be the date of Jesus' birth to appreciate that this is the time when the return of the sun is most needed. This is the time of darkness, and this is the time when we need a Prince of Peace. And so we celebrate. Merry Christmas, friends. Our closing hymn also speaks of bringing a light to the darkness. Bring a torch. Jeanette Isabella, number 233, Rise in Body or in Spirit. May we go in peace and love, questioning history, trusting the star still to guide us. Blessed be. Amen. Stay with you till we meet.